The sun burned overhead, hot and unrelenting, turning the red dirt of Briar Hollow into cracked clay and blistering dust. Flies buzzed around the field, clinging to sweat-stained skin, and the only sound above the cicadas was the creaking groan of labor, backs bent, cotton sacks dragging behind ragged boots, and the occasional bark of a whip slicing the air. Ruth Bellamy staggered, one hand pressed to the small of her swollen back, the other gripping her makeshift cotton sack. She was 8 months pregnant and looked ready to collapse. Her dress clung to her, soaked through from hours in the heat. Her lips were split, her ankles swollen. Her breath came in sharp little pants. But she didn't stop. "Move, girl," barked Silas Bragg, the overseer, mounted tall on a rusting roan mare. His wide-brimmed hat shaded nothing but scorn. "Baby ain't worth a dime if its mama don't pull her weight." Ruth gritted her teeth. She didn't answer. She didn't look up. That was the only way to survive here, eyes low, mouth shut, hands moving. The whip cracked near her feet. Not a strike. A warning. "Don't make me do it," Silas drawled, though his voice held the sickly sweetness of someone who hoped she would. A sharp pain knifed through her stomach. Not the usual wait or pull. This was different, deep, low, and sudden. She gasped, hand bracing her belly. Silas snorted. "Oh, you gonna make a scene now? What, want the day off to birth your brat?" The others in the field kept their heads down. No one would look at her. No one would speak. Sympathy got you fired. Or worse. Ruth straightened. Barely. She forced herself upright, though her knees shook like dry leaves. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice came out rough, like a nail dragged across stone. She wasn't. But she'd be damned before she let that bastard see her break. She had known hardship all her life. Born in the slums east of the river, raised by a mother who died too young and a father who drank too fast. But back then there had been a dream, escape maybe. Oh, and then there was Thomas. Thomas Bellamy had hands like an anvil and a heart bigger than the sky. He'd pulled her from the mud with nothing but a smile and a smith's apron. They built something. A home. A dream that didn't ask for much. Just a quiet life, a warm stove, the sound of music on Sundays. Then came the mine. Then came Knox. Mayor Jedediah Knox owned Briar Hollow the way a wolf owns a carcass. He didn't run for office, he bought it. And when Thomas spoke out, when he raised his voice about the unsafe shafts, the collapsed tunnels, the unpaid wages, Knox made sure the mine caved in on him. No one said it was murder. But they all knew. And Ruth? She was left with a house she couldn't keep, debts she couldn't pay, and a child growing inside her. That's when Bragg came calling. "You owe us," he'd said, smiling without humor. "Your husband left things unsettled. But you can work it off. Strong hands. I reckon the baby'll stay until harvest." That was 6 months ago. Now she stood in the field, belly swollen, vision spinning, bones aching. The world tilted just slightly, and the sky shimmered. She took a step, faltered, and hit the ground hard. Her knees scraped raw. Her hands flailed against the dust. Silas didn't dismount. "Someone get her up," he muttered. No one moved. Then came a voice, quiet and clear. "She's in labor." It was Martha Hanley, another field worker. Widow. Eyes like steel. She didn't look at Bragg when she spoke, but she stepped toward Ruth, fingers twitching. "Back to your row," Silas said, whip dangling from his saddle. "Ain't your job." "She needs a midwife," Martha pressed. "Or at least water. She can give birth right there. Plenty of space." He grinned. Something inside Ruth snapped. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was rage. She crawled to her knees, hand pressed to her side, sweat streaking her cheeks. Her voice shook, but it cut like a blade. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Silas tilted his head. "What's that, sweetheart?" She looked up. Her eyes didn't beg. They promised. "One day you'll answer for every inch of pain you put on me." The overseer laughed. "That a threat from a half-dead girl lying in the dirt?" "No," Ruth said. "It's a prophecy." She screamed then. A cry that seemed to tear the sky. Her water broke in a wet splash across the dust, and suddenly the weight of it all crashed around them. "Hell," Silas muttered, reining his horse back. Martha stepped forward without waiting. "Get me a blanket," she snapped at the field. "Now." The others stirred. There was power in her tone. A blanket was thrown. Someone fetched water from the trough. In minutes, they turned a corner of the field into a makeshift birthing ground. Ruth's face was gray with pain. She bit down on a strip of leather someone had handed her. Her fingers clawed the earth. "Push," Martha ordered. The labor was cruel. Long Bragg sat impatiently on his horse until the blood began to soak the dirt. Then he rode off, muttering about women's business. No one missed him. The sun dipped low as the cries filled the field. Birds circled above. Flies scattered. And then, like thunder after lightning, the baby arrived. A girl. Tiny. Red. Wailing. Martha cleaned her gently, wrapped her in the softest cloth she could find, a stolen bit of cotton from the harvest. She placed the baby in Ruth's trembling arms. Ruth looked down at the child and let a single tear fall. "Sadie," she whispered. "You're mine now." Sadie Bellamy. Born in a cotton field under the eye of a town that hated her. Born in blood and sweat and silence. But alive. Ruth lay back, exhausted, cradling her daughter like a fragile piece of moonlight. When Bragg returned an hour later, drunk from the saloon, he barely glanced at the newborn. "Hope the little runt don't cry too loud," he muttered, stepping over the blood-stained dirt. Martha stood in his way. "She'll cry if she wants," she said coolly. Silas eyed her, then turned away. The workers whispered that night. Quietly. Softly. About the way Ruth had looked up at him. About the promise in her voice. About the baby who came screaming into a world that didn't want her. Inside the barn, Ruth whispered lullabies. Her voice was hoarse, raw, but warm. "They think they broke me," she murmured to the child's soft cheek. "But they only broke the lock." Sadie slept, unaware of the storm she'd been born into. Outside, the town of Briar Hollow groaned in its sleep. The same buildings. The same shadows. The same fear. But something had changed. It started small. A whisper. A breath of wind. A crack in the foundation. They didn't know it yet, but a reckoning had been born. Not just a child. Not just a daughter. A fire. And the fire had a name. Sadie. Sadie Bellamy didn't grow up like other children. There were no lullabies past her first year, no dolls carved from pine or bright ribbons in her hair. What she had instead was grit under her fingernails, scars on her knuckles, and eyes that learned early how to read a man's intention before he spoke a word. By the time she was 7, Sadie could haul water from the well, split kindling, and wrap her mother's feet at night when the bones ached too much to walk. Ruth never asked. Sadie never waited to be told. Theirs was a quiet partnership forged from necessity, not sentiment. Love wasn't spoken between them, it was demonstrated in shared bread, in silent strength, in fierce glances when others dared look down on either of them. They lived on the edge of Briar Hollow in a shack built from the remnants of their old home. The forge that once roared with Thomas Bellamy's fire now stood cold and empty, a stone skeleton of dreams buried alongside him. Ruth had turned to taking in laundry, mending clothes, and whatever scraps of honest work she could find. Honest didn't pay much, but it was clean, and that mattered. Sadie's first lesson in survival didn't come from her mother, though. It came from a man named Remy Calhoun. Half drunk, half legend, Remy had been a gunslinger once, or so the stories claimed. He wore one eye covered with a patch and the other too bright, too wild. Most folks gave him a wide berth. Sadie didn't. She found him one afternoon behind the saloon, bleeding from a gash above his eyebrow after a card game went bad. He was trying to light a cigar with shaking hands. She stood over him, all of 7 years old, eyes narrowed. "You gonna die or smoke yourself to death first?" she asked. He looked up, chuckled, and handed her the cigar. "Light this, darlin'. My hands are useless." She did. And then she took his flask and poured it over the wound. He howled. "You little devil. Quit squirming," she said. "You want infection?" From that day forward, Remy took to calling her Snakebite. Said she was small but mean and left a mark. He taught her how to shoot tin cans off fence posts and how to gut a rabbit without flinching. Ruth disapproved, vehemently, but she didn't stop it. She knew the world wouldn't be kind to Sadie. Better she learned to bite before it did. Sadie soaked up Remy's lessons like a parched desert takes to rain. How to spot a lie. How to bluff. How to keep your back to a wall and your pistol close. He never let her handle a loaded gun, until she turned 9. Then he placed a revolver in her palm and said, "You point this at someone, you better be ready to live with what follows." She nodded once. That was enough. While the town jeered and whispered about Ruth's bastard field rat, Sadie walked taller. Not because she didn't feel their words, but because she refused to let them see her flinch. At 12, she knocked a boy unconscious for spitting near her mother's boots. Sheriff Donnelly dragged her to Ruth's shack by the collar, lecturing the whole way. "She's turning wild," he said. "Like a stray." Ruth didn't blink. "Then maybe stop poking her with sticks." The sheriff left angry and red-faced. Sadie smirked. That night, Ruth slapped the grin off her face. "I won't have you become what they expect," she said. Sadie's cheek burned, but her eyes held steady. Then teach me how to be better. And Ruth did. She taught her numbers by tallying laundry earnings, taught her words by copying verses from an old Bible salvaged from the church fire. They read together late into the night by candlelight, one reading aloud, the other correcting mispronunciations. Ruth taught her to sew, to barter, and to listen for the weight behind people's words. But knowledge didn't keep pain away. The winter of Sadie's 13th year, work dried up. Ruth, desperate, took a cleaning job at the mayor's estate. It was Knox's wife who demanded Ruth scrub floors while sick with fever. When Ruth collapsed in the parlor, they dragged her out like a sack of grain. Sadie found her at the town edge, barely conscious, lips blue. She carried her home, alone, through snow and wind and biting silence. Then she sat beside her all night, holding her hand and whispering, "You're not allowed to leave me. Not yet." Ruth survived, but she never truly recovered. Her cough deepened. Her eyes grew tired. The strength she once wore like armor now flickered, dimmer by the month. Sadie stepped into her place, taking on every odd job she could find. She worked in the stables, mucking filth. She delivered packages for the grocer, sometimes with messages she wasn't meant to read, but did anyway. She learned the rhythms of the town, the power of secrets. And she learned hate. Not the loud, obvious kind, but the slow, gnawing hatred that builds from watching someone you love be ground down daily by people who wouldn't dare say her name to her face. One afternoon, Sadie saw Silas Bragg in the general store. He was older now, meaner and slower. His boots tracked mud across the floor. He laughed with the butcher about the field whore who popped a baby in the dirt. Sadie didn't speak. She simply stood near the door, staring. Bragg looked up. His laughter faltered. "You got a problem, girl?" "No," she said calmly. "But you will." He grunted, scoffed. But his eyes didn't meet hers again. At 14, Sadie started carrying a knife hidden in her boot. Not to use. Not yet. But it made her stand straighter. It made the men in the saloon step aside. Just enough. It was around then that the story started. People said the Bellamy girl could talk snakes into biting who she pointed at. That she once threw a man out of a second-story window for touching her coat. That she could shoot a bird mid-flight. Most of it wasn't true. But Sadie didn't correct them. By 16 she was tall and sharp as a whip. Her cheekbones cut like knives and her voice dropped low when angry. She was her mother's daughter, but something more too. Something colder. Ruth saw it. Felt it. "You're changing," she said one night over stew. "I have to. Not like this. Not with poison in your blood." Sadie didn't reply. It came to a head weeks later, when Ruth was denied medical attention at the new town clinic. They said she didn't qualify. Said they had limited resources. But the banker's wife, with her fake illness and silk gloves, was let right through. Sadie returned home in silence, her mother coughing behind her. That night she packed a bag. Ruth woke to the sound of boots on wood. "Where are you going?" "I need to leave," Sadie said, strapping a pistol to her hip. "There's nothing here for me but watching you waste away." Ruth sat up, weak but alert. "Running doesn't make you strong." "I'm not running," Sadie said. "I'm sharpening." Ruth's eyes filled, but she didn't beg. That wasn't who she was. "Promise me one thing," she said softly. Sadie hesitated. "When you come back, and I know you will, don't come back angry. Come back ready." Sadie nodded once. "I will." She left before dawn, her silhouette vanishing into the frost-tinged horizon. Behind her, the town of Briar Hollow slept, unaware that it had just let its reckoning walk out the front gate. The wind shifted slightly. Just enough to carry Ruth's whisper through the trees. She'll be back. And when she did, she wouldn't be a girl anymore. The first time Sadie Bellamy returned to Briar Hollow, the sky was a burning orange, the kind that bled across the hills like spilled oil. The town hadn't changed much, still a patchwork of crooked roofs, wind-worn storefronts, and dirt roads that turned to sludge when it rained. But to Sadie, everything looked smaller, duller, easier to break. She rode in alone on a black gelding, dusty and lean, the kind of animal that didn't spook easy. Her hat was pulled low, coat flared behind her like wings in the wind. She wore 2 guns now, twin iron revolvers holstered at her hips, and a long scar curled just above her left cheek, like a question mark someone never got to finish. No one recognized her. The children stared first, then ducked behind fences. The older men straightened but didn't speak. Women paused on porches, laundry still in hand, faces squinting against the late sun. One man tipped his hat slowly, unsure whether out of respect or fear. Probably both. Sadie didn't speak. Didn't smile. She simply rode through, slow and steady, her boots echoing off the old plank sidewalks like a ticking clock. At the edge of town, where the hills swallowed the road, she turned and looked back once. "I told you I'd be back," she whispered. She found Ruth in the same shack, but age had crept in while Sadie was gone. Her mother's hair was nearly white now, skin paper-thin, hands gnarled with arthritis. Yet when she looked up from her sewing and saw her daughter in the doorway, the weariness in her bones evaporated. "Sadie." The word cracked like lightning. Sadie stepped inside, removed her hat, and knelt beside her. "I didn't think I'd find you still fighting." Ruth reached out and touched her cheek. "And I didn't think you'd come back with 2 guns. "They're not just for show," Sadie said quietly. Ruth smiled, sad and proud. "I never figured they were." Sadie stayed the night. Cooked dinner while Ruth talked about weather, neighbors, and the price of grain. Everything except the reason her daughter had returned. But neither needed to name it. They both felt it, thick and heavy in the air, like thunder waiting to crack. The next morning, Sadie walked into town. Alone. No gunplay. No threats. Just presence. She stepped into the saloon first, the same one where her father used to drink on Sundays and play cards with men who'd later turn their backs on him. It was still run by Marshall Trigg, a man with a beer gut and broken morals. He looked up from the counter and squinted. "You lost." Sadie pulled out a silver coin and flipped it toward him. "Just thirsty." He caught it, studied it, then glanced again at her face. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe? Or memory? "Wait a damn, Bellamy?" She didn't answer. Just met his gaze until he looked away. "I heard you ran off. What brings you back?" Sadie took a slow sip from the glass he poured. "I missed the hospitality." Trigg gave a nervous chuckle. "You know, folks might not take kindly to ghosts showing up. This town's changed." "No," she said. "It hasn't." She left the saloon and walked the length of Main Street. With each step, whispers followed. Eyes widened. Rumors lit like dry brush. Some remembered the girl. Some knew the legend. Few were ready for both to walk into their lives at once. By sundown, the mayor's house was already locked up. Jedediah Knox hadn't lost a drop of arrogance with the years. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his suits were finer now, imported from St. Louis, but his eyes still glimmered with that same reptilian smugness. He watched her from the second-floor window, a tumbler of bourbon in his hand, knuckles white. "She's just one girl," he muttered. "She ain't a girl anymore," said Silas Bragg, leaning in the corner, now a deputy under Knox's thumb. His gut hung heavy, his jaw bristled with uneven stubble. He remembered Sadie well, and the promise in her eyes when she was barely old enough to hold a gun. "She ain't here to say hello," he added. Knox turned to him. "Then kill her." Quietly. Bragg shook his head. "We try that, we better be sure. You ever seen a rattler get stepped on and not strike?" Knox swirled the bourbon in his glass. "Then we don't step. We let her slither around until someone else gets bit." That night the saloon burned. Flames tore through the roof just before midnight. No one saw who started it. But the words scrawled across the shattered window, burnt into the wood with a hot iron, left no mystery. "Bellamy's back." Silas stood in the rubble the next morning, jaw tight, knuckles cracked. "This is war," he muttered. Sadie watched from a distance. But up. Expression unreadable. She returned to Ruth before sunrise. Her mother was awake, waiting on the porch with a shawl pulled tight. "That you?" Sadie didn't pretend otherwise. "Yes." "You planning on setting the whole town on fire?" "Just the parts that need burning." Ruth's face didn't soften. "And when the ashes settle, what then?" Sadie looked out across the land, sun breaking over the hills. "Then maybe something decent can grow." 2 nights later, she found Silas alone behind the jailhouse, drunk and mean, grumbling about ghosts. He never saw her coming. She pressed a pistol to the back of his neck and whispered, "Remember me now?" He froze. "Sadie, look, it was business." "I didn't." "You whipped my mother while she was pregnant." "I did what Knox told me." Sadie slammed him into the wall. "You enjoyed it." He struggled, but she twisted his arm, forced him to his knees. "You know what I came back for?" "I ain't got your answers." "No," she said, crouching beside him. "But you're going to help me find them." She didn't kill him. She tied him up, dragged him, mouth gagged, eyes wide, to the same barn where she was born, the one where Ruth once screamed through blood and dirt while Bragg looked on, indifferent. She left him there, tied to the post like an offering. By dawn, half the town had heard about it. Some were angry. Others thrilled. Most were silent. But fear was moving. Sadie walked through the market that day like a shadow with weight. People stepped aside. No one met her eyes. Inside her old home, Ruth cleaned vegetables in silence. "I heard about Silas," she said finally. "He's alive," Sadie said. "That don't mean you did right." Sadie poured water into a bowl. "He had choices. So do you." There was silence between them. Heavy. Complex. Then Ruth's voice quieter. "Promise me something." Sadie's shoulders tensed. "You know I don't make promises I can't keep." "This one's simple," Ruth said. "Don't lose yourself chasing what broke me." Sadie turned to her, voice soft but steady. "I'm not chasing it, Ma. I'm dragging it into the daylight." That night, Knox barricaded his home. Doubled the guards. Paid off the sheriff twice. Sadie watched from the trees, face unreadable. She didn't want his house. Or his money. She wanted something else. She wanted the whole town to see him beg. And that part was just getting started. Morning broke over Briar Hollow in streaks of red and gold, but the light brought no warmth. The town had gone silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence that follows snowfall or prayer, but the sort that hangs in the air before a gun goes off. Sadie Bellamy walked the streets like she owned them now, not with arrogance but with purpose. Her boots struck the dirt with rhythm, twin pistols holstered but not hidden. The whisper of her name passed like wind through dry grass. Children watched from behind curtains. Men shifted uneasily at storefronts. Women stared longer than most, some with fear, others with the glint of something close to hope. Knox's mansion sat on the hill like a swollen tick, swollen with years of other people's pain. Sadie stared up at it from the crossroads, arms crossed, jaw set. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Her presence had become its own language. She had given them time. Time to feel the weight of her return. Time to remember what they'd let happen. Time to ask themselves what it meant to be part of a town that watched a woman work the fields until she bled, and said nothing. But the time for memory was done. Now it was time to choose. Word spread that Silas Bragg had vanished. No body, no confession, just silence. The truth was Sadie had left him breathing, but barely. He'd crawled out of the barn bloodied and broken, his pride shattered beyond repair. He didn't show his face in town again. Not that anyone missed him. Sadie knew Knox would be next. But she didn't want him dead in a ditch. That would have been too easy. She wanted something deeper. Slower. He needed to break in front of the people who'd called him leader. He needed to fall to his knees where everyone could see it. So she waited. And when she heard he'd called a private meeting at the old town hall, just a handful of loyalists, guards, a few business owners too scared to say no, she didn't hesitate. She stepped into the hall like a storm through a cracked window. Doors flung open. Dust and sunlight followed her in. Knox looked up from the head of the table. His face twitched once, just enough to betray his fear. The guards rose, reaching for weapons, but Sadie was faster. One pistol drawn, aimed between the eyes of the first man before his fingers even touched the grip of his rifle. "Sit down," she said, voice low and cutting. "Unless dying in this room sounds better than standing for something." The second man hesitated, glanced at Knox, then dropped his hand. The others followed. Knox stood slowly, lips curling. "You think this is how change happens? Guns and theater?" Sadie lowered her weapon just enough. "No. Change happens when cowards get exposed." She walked toward him. Every step echoing off the walls. "You had your boots on my mother's back while she begged for breath. You let her rot in the sun, pregnant, bleeding, and you laughed." Knox's lip twitched again, but he kept his voice calm. "You want revenge. I get it. But vengeance is a child's answer." "No," Sadie said. "Vengeance is your legacy. I'm just here to hold up the mirror." Knox took a step forward, chest puffed. "I built this town. Without me there'd be no Briar Hollow. No jobs. No safety." Sadie's hand twitched near her holster, but she didn't draw. Instead, she nodded once to the shadows behind her. The doors creaked again, and this time Ruth Bellamy entered. The room stilled. She wore no gun. No armor. Just a plain shawl and a steady gaze. Her limp was more pronounced now, but her back stayed straight. Her eyes locked on Knox like he was something she'd already buried. Sadie turned to the room. "You all sat quiet while he stripped families to the bone. You followed him when he raised prices, closed schools, cut wages, and then poured whiskey on the ashes. You said nothing when my mother cried in the dirt. You said nothing when my father was buried in a mine no one even bothered to investigate." She pointed to Knox. "That's not leadership. That's a leech fat on silence." Knox scoffed, but his fingers trembled. "Whatever this is," he growled, "it's not justice. Ruth stepped forward now, her voice quiet but clear. No. It's truth. And truth don't care if you believe it. Knox's voice rose, brittle. You think this town will follow her? A bastard child and a broken woman? Sadie raised her pistol again. Not to shoot. Just to remind. No, she said. They'll follow themselves. And you'll follow them. Out. Knox looked around the room now, really looked, and saw what Sadie had already seen. The tide had shifted. Loyalty had turned to survival. Power for the first time had changed hands. He tried one last bluff. You can't run a town with threats and shadows. Sadie holstered her pistol. No. But I can tear down the part that needs to die. And after that, we'll rebuild. Ruth stepped beside her daughter. Their silhouettes, side by side, looked like a memory reborn. Knox's shoulders sagged. Later that day, the town watched as Jedediah Knox was led down Main Street in silence. Not in chains. Not in blood. Just stripped of title, guards, and the illusion of power. No one jeered. No one helped. They just watched. And that was worse. He left Briar Hollow with a suitcase, a bottle, and nothing else. By evening, the saloon was reopened under a new name. The bell tower, long silent, rang again. The schoolhouse received lumber to repair its broken roof. And Ruth sat on her porch, peeling apples, the breeze light against her skin for the first time in years. Sadie joined her, setting down a small sack of coins. From the bank, she said. They're returning everything he stole. Ruth didn't smile. Just nodded slow. Still doesn't fix everything. No, Sadie said, sitting beside her. But it starts. They watched the sun fall behind the hills, casting long shadows over a town that suddenly felt less haunted. Ruth turned to her. You did it without blood. Sadie exhaled. Barely. I raised a fighter. You raised a survivor. Ruth touched her hand. Same thing. The quiet between them was warm now, no longer burdened. Then from the road, a wagon passed. A boy inside it called out, Sadie Bellamy. She looked up. You really shoot a man's hat clean off without touching his scalp? Sadie grinned. Only if he deserves it. The boy hooped and the wagon rolled on. Ruth chuckled, shaking her head. You're becoming a story. Sadie watched the dust trail behind the wheels. Maybe, she said. But I want the truth told too. You can't control the wind, Ruth said softly. No, Sadie agreed. But I can ride it. And as night settled over Briar Hollow, the wind carried more than dust. It carried change. Not loud. Not sudden. But certain. The kind of change that came when fear lost its grip and silence learned to speak. Sadie looked out into the dark, her eyes sharp and waiting. She wasn't done yet. 10 years passed, and the town of Briar Hollow bore little resemblance to the place where Ruth Bellamy had once fallen in the dirt, pregnant and alone, while the world watched. The saloon, rebuilt from the ashes, now stood with bright windows and laughter pouring through open doors. The mines, no longer under crooked control, were co-managed by a cooperative of workers. Even the schoolhouse rang with children's voices, the kind that had once been drowned out by fear. But some things remained the same. The dust still swirled on the outskirts, the prairie wind still whispered through the hills, and every so often, a lone rider would cut across the horizon, dark coat, wide hat, a glint of silver at her side. Sadie Bellamy never stayed long. She came and went like thunder, unpredictable, loud, necessary. She was legend now. Tales followed her like shadows. Some true, some not. They said she once caught a bullet with her teeth, that she rode with bandits just to bring them to justice, that she'd shot a judge in the hand for cheating a farmer's widow. Children repeated her name like a spell. Grown men lowered their voices when they spoke of her. But to Ruth she was still just her daughter. She had the same stubborn set to her jaw, the same quiet anger behind her eyes. And every July on the same day Sadie returned. No matter the weather, no matter the trouble. That was the only promise she ever kept. On the 10th year she rode in as the morning mist burned off the hills. She carried 2 pistols and a satchel full of gold, though she never said from where. Her horse was older now but still strong. Dust caked her boots, blood stained her sleeve, and she smelled faintly of gunpowder and tobacco. Ruth met her at the gate. You're limping, she said. Bullet grazed me last week, Sadie replied, dismounting with a grunt. Doctor in Willow Creek said I needed rest. So I figured this was close enough to that. Ruth narrowed her eyes. Rest doesn't usually come with 3 loaded weapons. Sadie smiled faintly and embraced her mother. I missed your sarcasm. You missed my cooking more like. Inside the house, the stove was hot, and something savory simmered in a pot. Sadie sat at the kitchen table, hat tipped back, one boot on the edge of a chair. "You're getting older," Ruth said, sliding a bowl in front of her. "So are you," Sadie countered. "Difference is I earned my years quietly." Sadie took a bite and leaned back. Too late for that path now. For a time they spoke of small things. The market. The preacher's new dog. A child born last spring who had Ruth's eyes. But even in the comfort of their reunion, something pulled at the edge of the conversation. A tension neither named. Not yet. That night they sat on the porch, crickets loud, sky black and deep with stars. Ruth rocked slowly, hands folded in her lap. Sadie leaned back, her gaze fixed on the road leading out of town. "You ever think about staying?" Ruth asked softly. "Sometimes." "What stops you?" Sadie hesitated. "I don't know how to live quiet." Ruth nodded, like she'd known that answer already. "Maybe you never had the chance to learn." Silence stretched between them. Then Ruth said, "Something's coming, isn't it?" Sadie didn't turn her head. "Word spreads faster than bullets. A man named Colt Madigan's been riding across counties, picking off old names, anyone tied to the past. Anyone who stood up against Knox or men like him. I've seen the aftermath. Burned homes. Empty graves. Why now? Because fear is trying to crawl back into places it once ruled. Because some men only know how to follow power, not build it. And you?" Sadie sighed. "I'm the one that power couldn't buy." He sees that as unfinished business. Ruth stood slowly and rested her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Then we finish it." The next day the town buzzed with whispers. Sadie was seen speaking to the blacksmith, to the new sheriff, an honest man this time, and to Clara Mendez who now ran the school. They talked in alleyways, behind barns, not in panic but with purpose. That evening riders were spotted on the ridge. 12 in total. Dust trailing behind them like smoke from a cannon. Colt Madigan led them, dressed in all black, his face scarred and hard. He'd once ridden under Knox, back when blood paid better than wages. Now he hunted the last remnants of resistance, not for ideology but reputation. Sadie's name was the final piece of the legend he wanted to destroy. He sent a message first. A boy, maybe 9 years old, arrived shaking and pale, a note clutched in his fingers. The note read, "Come alone. Midnight. No mercy if others interfere." Sadie read it once, then burned it. "I'll go," she said. "You shouldn't," Ruth replied. "I have to." "No, you want to." "That's different." Sadie looked at her mother then, not as a child seeking permission but as a woman acknowledging the weight of what came next. "I end this or he keeps coming. Maybe not for me but for someone else. Someone softer. Someone who doesn't deserve it." Ruth stepped close, touched Sadie's face like she used to when she was small. "Then end it your way. Just don't let him take who you are." At midnight, Sadie stood at the center of the crossroads, twin pistols at her side, breath slow and steady. Colt Madigan emerged from the dark with his men fanned out behind him. Their horses snorted, uneasy. "Didn't think you'd come alone," he said. Sadie didn't flinch. "Didn't think you'd need 12 men to kill one woman." Colt chuckled. "It ain't about numbers. It's about making a statement." Sadie stepped forward. "Then let me speak first." She drew in one fluid motion. 2 shots cracked through the night. The first dropped the man to Colt's right. The second took out the one reaching for his rifle. Chaos followed. Colt Dove rolled, returned fire. Sadie moved like a whisper, precise, cold, unstoppable. Her feet barely touched the ground. Bullets sparked off stone. Horses reared. Shouts broke the quiet open like a fist through glass. By the end, 5 lay dead, 3 wounded, and 4 had fled. Sadie stood, bleeding from the shoulder, but unbroken. Colt staggered to his knees, one arm limp, breath ragged. "You think killing me changes anything?" he spat. Sadie stepped close, pressed her pistol to his chest. "No. But it reminds the world who holds the line." She didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she turned and walked away. "You're not worth the bullet," she called over her shoulder. By dawn, word had spread. Not just across Briar Hollow but beyond. That Sadie Bellamy had faced the last of the old cruelty and let him live, because justice, unlike vengeance, had to be chosen. Later, Ruth wrapped her shoulder, quiet and focused. "You're lucky it wasn't worse." Sadie grinned through the pain. "Story's better this way." As the sun climbed higher, a small girl wandered up the porch. She had dark hair, bright eyes, and a paper in her hand. "Are you really the one who made a whole town bow?" Sadie blinked. "Who told you that?" "My uncle. He said you burned a man's house with just your stare." Sadie looked at Ruth, who only raised a brow. The girl held up the paper, Crude drawing of Sadie, pistols drawn, fire behind her. Will you sign it? Sadie laughed and did, then ruffled the girl's hair. As the child ran off, Ruth said, "You've become more than a story now." Sadie looked down at the porch, then out at the road. Maybe. But I'm still my mother's daughter. That's the part one want them to remember. And with that, she stood, back straight, head high, ready for whatever wind came next.